my day.
Season 3, Episode 15 of the popular 60s sitcom The Andy Griffith Show starts as episodes of the show often do, with Sheriff Deputy Barney Fife getting himself into some hijinks. Fife was always one of the defining parts of the show's popularity, the stereotypical bumbling small-town cop constantly lecturing other members of the community while being basically incapable of successfully doing his job. In this episode, Andy and the Governor, we begin with Barney telling off some old-timers in the middle of littering outside the police station. When they protest the importance of such a thing, Deputy Fife is quick to assert to them that upholding the law here is as important as anywhere else, as the law above all else should be straightforward, firm, and consistent. In his own words, of course, soon after, we get the punchline, with the county governor's limo riding right up to the curb with the governor's chauffeur in tow, in an area clearly marked no parking. The old-timers make a few jabs at Barney, assuming he's obviously not going to go against his own superiors just to prove a point, and then something happens. Barney writes the ticket. To stand by his principles, Barney goes against the establishment. This is roundly seen as a bad call by those around him, including his own Sheriff Andy, who admits he technically did the right thing, while pointing out he probably could have just let that one slide. Then the expected call comes from the Governor, bursting into praise of Barney for his actions, and informing the Sheriff that he plans to head down to the station and meet with Fife to thank him for his bravery and willingness to stand by the law. Most of the remaining episode is taken up by gags relating to Barney being nervous about meeting the Governor, getting wasted in the middle of the day, then cleaning up just in time to shake hands and nervously thank him for his words. And that's Season 3, Episode 15 of The Andy Griffith Show. So here's a question to kick off this video. What does this episode tell us about the nature of justice and order in American society? Now, obviously, that's subjective. You could read a lot of different things out of this episode. But I think my reading is a fairly straightforward one. That not only is it good to stand by your principles in the face of personal inconvenience, but that it's good even if those around you tell you it's bad. And in fact, not only will standing by your principles ultimately be accepted by the establishment, it can even be celebrated, and all thanks to that one simple, almost entirely harmless act of defiance. I think it's worth noting that this is one of the only times in the show's run that Barney not only successfully enforces the law, but gets this level of praise for it, in the 5 seasons he was in The Andy Griffith Show and his short-lived spin-off Mayberry RFD. So what does the show get out of telling the audience that this is the way justice occurs in this society? What is the importance of telling us as viewers that this relationship is one of simple misunderstandings and imbalances that can be easily cleared up as long as the cops do their jobs? So anyway, I've been watching Dirty Harry movies all week. I just finished writing a video about them, and I'm sorry to tell you all that I'm officially a cop. Now put away that fat blunt. Cutesy little 50s cops are out. Sick-ass 80s cops are in.
This rifle might make a nice souvenir, but it's inadmissible as evidence.
And who says that?
It's the law.
Well, in the laws crazy. 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 Well, in the
Also a quick notice that this video is sponsored by NordVPN, who you should really check out if you're looking for an affordable and reliable service for online personal security. Did you know they were the only VPN to get a perfect score from PC Mag? I also personally use them, and they are good. I'm going to be mentioning them a couple of times in this video, but for this one I'd like to experiment and see if shorter mentions are just as effective as longer ones. So if you want to keep them shorter, sign up for discounted membership down below with the offer code JackSaint. I don't make the codes. Once again, that's nordvpn.com/JackSaint. And don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoy. You punks. Have you ever had a friend say something that you initially think must be a joke, but then you're actually not sure if they were serious, but then you keep talking and get the sense maybe it was a joke about the idea of someone making that joke, but also maybe they were serious about the point being made by joking about the idea of making that joke? What you just heard is basically the viewing experience of watching the Dirty Harry movies and actually trying to keep track of the messages in the films. Did you know there was more than one, by the way? There's 5. But with my demographics, I'm sure some of you don't even know what a Dirty Harry is, so quick rundown. Dirty Harry was a smash hit action thriller released in December 1971. 2 years into Richard Nixon's first term, and also 2 years into the Zodiac Killer's horrific murder spree. The film takes clear cues from both, the story of a renegade maverick cop doing whatever it takes to protect his city from the threat of a blackmailing spree killer known only as Scorpio. Actually, he's also known as the Killer. That's what he gets called in the credits. I guess that's just a confusing name for the police to give a murderer? More thefts? This must be the work of the Stealer. Inspector Harry Callahan do not give a fuck. Introduced in the film gunning down 2 bank robbers in crowded public areas and almost killing a third after apprehending him, against the orders of his superiors, you probably know the cop archetype we're working with here.
You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
The thing is, Dirty Harry is the archetype. If you're not familiar, Harry Callahan is literally one of the most influential portrayals of a cop in media in living memory.
I don't want any more trouble like you had last year on the South Side. Understand? That's my policy.
Yes, well, when I see 5 weirdos dressed in togas stabbing a guy in the middle of the park in full view of 100 people, I shoot the bastards. That's my policy.
That was a Shakespeare in the Park production of Julius Caesar, you moron.
In the same way we probably don't get Chief Wiggum without Barney Fife, without Dirty Harry we probably don't get Jack Bauer, Spike Spiegel, Rust Cole, The Punisher, or Ethan Thomas. You don't remember Ethan Thomas from Condemned? He has very dense bones. In Harry's case, he has very dense moral values, which, based on his actions in the movie, largely consist of an obsession with catching and punishing criminals and a general disregard for public safety, and also an inexplicable lack of knowledge about even the most basic aspects of law enforcement.
You're lucky I'm not indicting you for assault with intent to commit murder. What? Does Escobedo ring a bell? Miranda?
Harry represents an absolute caricature of the maverick cop who doesn't play by any rules, up to and including respecting basic human rights. Something his fellow cops are very keen to point out.
What I'm saying is that man had rights.
Well, I'm all broken up about that man's rights.
But at the end of the day, the film makes him right. And it turns out someone as ruthless as Harry is exactly what it requires to take down a monster like Scorpio. He stops him from kidnapping a school bus full of children, and the day is saved. But for Harry, something still doesn't feel right. How can he uphold and stand for a system that seems so against supporting the only people doing anything to try and fix society? Harry takes his inspector badge and tosses it out into the lake. He might still believe in fighting for justice, but he's fed up fighting for the law. Incidentally, he goes back to being an inspector before the start of the second movie and stays that way for the rest of the series. Guess he just said he lost his badge in the couch or something. This is almost one of those films that doesn't require any in-depth analysis because it's so on the nose about basically everything it's trying to say. Harry is shown doing generally unobjectionable things like shooting back at criminals who open fire on him and beating up people who try to steal school buses full of children. Everyone around him, including his superiors, deliberately get in his way and try to stop him solving crimes. And in the end, only he is there to stop the really bad guy who wants to do really bad things. And then he literally throws the symbol of law enforcement into a ditch. The point being made is that law enforcement nowadays is ineffective and too caught up in soft-hearted liberal principles, and there's no longer a place for people like Harry who just want to get the job done. Hey, maybe we'd be catching that Zodiac killer if we weren't so caught up in things like giving people trials and human rights. It's what you expect. It's the same conservative talking point that takes the incredibly flimsy and easily corruptible position of giving police absolute authority and tries to pass it off as some kind of personal freedom that's being encroached on. Maybe good cops like Harry should always be allowed to do what they want because it's the only way to stop bad guys. Bad guy with a gun? Meet good guy with a gun. So because of how seemingly straightforward the presentation was here, I went into this entirely expecting this was just going to be one movie I briefly mentioned in a list of a bunch of other movies, all in one big cop movie video. Then I watched the sequel, and something unexpected happened. The film kind of agreed with me. The second Dirty Harry movie, Magnum Force, was released 2 years after the first, right around the time of Watergate and the events leading to Republican President Richard Nixon's resignation. It is, fittingly, a film that is a lot more suspicious of the ideology of its hero. Callahan is back to doing what he does best, gunning down crooks and disrespecting authority. At this point, Harry just showing up at a case is enough for every other cop to start flipping out, which maybe brings up questions of how the hell he's still on the force, but moving on. The tone for this one is set almost immediately, with a team of smug, dirty businessmen being pulled over by a gruff cop who refuses to be intimidated by them. Ah, this is a Dirty Harry movie, so maybe this is Dirty Harry, our ape brain tells us. But then the cop just comes right out and guns them all down in their seats. In fact, thank you for liking my tweet, Maggie Mayfish. In fact, this is the case the actual Harry will be investigating, in which vigilante cops have taken to murdering criminals and so-called degenerates without trial and without remorse. All the while, Harry, not knowing this motivation, continues to think the same way he always has about law enforcement. In fact, in this movie, there's a lot more people out to validate him on that. An old army pal drunkenly pulls him aside at one point and sullenly admits to him that
these days, a cop kills a hoodlum on the street, he might as well just dump the body someplace. Because those snot-nosed young bastards down at the DA's office will crucify him one way or another. A hood can kill a cop, but let a cop kill a hood? Am I right?
women swoon for him, even kids love him. It's just those darn superiors who somehow don't get his immediate appeal. You know, now that I think about it, a lot of things seem to be going Harry's way in this movie. In one scene, he suddenly decides to break rank and pose as an airline pilot aboard a commercial plane that's been hijacked by terrorists. And despite going in with no backup and instigating a shootout in a highly compact area filled with hostages, he manages to single-handedly take down all the bad guys with no civilian casualties. With that, maybe we'll make a point about it later. And hey, look! Harry's even being a bit of a woke bae.
They stick together like flypaper, you know? Everybody thought they were queer for each other.
I'll tell you something. If the rest of you could shoot like them, I wouldn't care if the whole damn department was queer. I wouldn't care if the whole damn department was queer.
So criminals keep dying, Harry keeps investigating, his superiors keep complaining, and finally he comes face to face with the Perps, a team of ex-Special Forces traffic cops who believe, or at least think they believe, all the same things as Harry about justice and the law.
It's not just a question of whether or not to use violence. There simply is no other way, Inspector. You, of all people, should understand that.
In Callahan's own words, however, they have misjudged him, and he continues on his mission to take him down. Harry winds up under fire from not just the traffic cops, but even one of his superiors. The one who kept telling him to respect basic human rights at that. We should have known. And in the end, Harry once again proves that a renegade, vigilante cop like him is the only reliable way of stopping the real bad guys. I had always imagined Dirty Harry as being a series where the first one was a classic and the others were just sort of there. So I wasn't expecting Magnum Force to be both more engaging just as a story, but also have way more interesting things to say on a political level. Clearly, this was a film that was highly aware of the criticisms of its predecessor as a borderline fascist apologetic hero's journey for a corrupt and bloodthirsty bigot. Look! He has a black sidekick now, oh jeez. But regardless, the decision to place the villainous role on fans of Dirty Harry who don't get Dirty Harry was a bold one that I personally appreciated. You know, with the help of this movie, we can finally clarify that what Harry does is a completely different kind of vigilantism to the other guys, because... So have you ever heard the term Thermian argument before? To catch everyone up, it was a form of rhetoric posed by YouTuber Dan Olsen in his video titled The Thermian Argument. The idea is that generally when we try to analyse or criticise works of fiction, we do so with the acknowledgement that it is a work of fiction. In his own words,
the only reason anything is the way that it is because a writer chose to make it that way.
The Thermian argument is one that seeks to dismiss criticism of the work on the basis that the things being criticised have some in-universe justification. So, for instance, it's not fair to criticise women always being put in damsel in distress roles in movies. That's just the role those specific women in those specific stories happen to have. Or, it's not fair to criticise horror movies for demonising the mentally ill, it's just those specific mentally ill characters who happen to be mass murderers. In this case, the argument would be, it's not fair to criticise the character of Harry Callahan for glorifying police brutality. The only people who end up suffering the consequences of that are people we already know are bad. So why am I bringing this up? Well, because it's basically the Thermian argument that the team behind this film are using to justify the difference between Harry and these traffic cops. To everyone but Harry and the audience, Harry's actions are basically indistinguishable from what these cops are doing. He's torturing and gunning down random suspects and putting the lives of the public in danger. The traffic cops are doing the same. This is even something directly highlighted by the Dirty Superior at the end of the film, who threatens to tell the precinct that Harry was in fact the shooter all along.
And who's gonna believe you? You're a killer, Harry. A maniac.
The movie deals with this complication about how you'd expect. It throws in a plot beat to make the problem go away. In Harry's own words, a man has to know his own limitations. The response the film has to critics of the first are that they failed to factor in that Harry is actually just an especially really good cop. So it doesn't really matter if he's acting in the same erratic, unapologetic, quick on the trigger vigilante way the corrupt cops are. Sure, he instigates fights in public areas and disrupts actual investigations for some quick retribution, but don't worry, nobody good will get shot. Harry will shoot all of the bad guys first, really quickly. And because we've written them all to be unapologetic evil monster people, we can say with certainty that they were definitely just going to cause more trouble. And when a situation like the end crops up, where Harry has to seriously consider the idea of taking out a superior for the greater good of not letting him continue to corrupt the police force, a car bomb happens to go off. The movie consistently finds ways to write around Harry facing the consequences and moral greys that inevitably come with giving vigilante cops free rein to act as judge, jury, and executioner. Where the only straightforward conclusion would be that heroes like Harry are good, but if we allow people like him, we're also allowing people like those traffic cops. The movie instead says, those stupid traffic cops, why can't they just be more like Harry and never make mistakes and say cool things like,
go ahead, make my day.
It's a surprisingly effective bait and switch, providing a highly orchestrated reality where Harry can do all the same things the corrupt and violent cops do, but avoid any of the criticism behind that comparison by letting him skip the inevitable outcomes of giving cops that kind of power. So you see, kids, Dirty Harry couldn't be brazenly glorifying a brutal criminal regime. Nothing bad happens when he does it, and he kills the cops where it does. And so it was that all of the viewers came out staunchly anti-fascist, with no further confusion about unaccountable law enforcement or... oh no. Oh no! In this movie, Harry teams up with a feminist to take down the Black Panther Party. Thanks, Hillary. Or at least that's a part of the film, which is focused on Harry being forced to team up with a female partner in a case against a group of radical extremist revolutionaries. I also just have to mention how the film starts, with just a perfect representation of exactly what I was talking about before, with the trend of the universe kind of moulding around Harry to justify his behaviour. In this case, Harry is introduced trying to resolve a hostage situation in a liquor store in the safest way possible, and he does so by meeting with the criminals, agreeing to their demands, then walking over to his car and just driving it straight through the store, and then getting out of his car and shooting them all. Don't worry, the hostages are just sort of gone. Oh wait, there they are. Good thing they weren't anywhere near the criminals holding them hostage. Then it'd just seem like a terrible plan.
You took out 2 front doors, 1 front window, 12 feet of counter, plus damages.
So Harry gets reprimanded, gets bumped down to processing personnel, and gets mad when he finds out a woman officer got in because of affirmative action. Ah! But don't worry, he's wrong about her. We told you he wasn't racist, we told you he wasn't a homophobe, and now he's definitely not a sexist.
Welcome to homicide. I wouldn't care if the whole damn department was queer.
Let me ask you just one last time. Where's Wanda?
Other than that, it's essentially business as usual. Harry repeatedly acts with needless violence towards suspected criminals, endangers the lives of the public, but it's okay because in the end he gets results because you need your good guy with a gun to beat the bad guy with a gun and yada yada yada. And his lady partner dies, for the same reason the film's antagonists are a vague representation of far-left extremists. Just to keep it clear that these movies will accommodate for the liberal critics, but not too much. Hey, it's been a while since I mentioned NordVPN. I'm gonna do that real quick. Did you click the link in the description for a 75% off discount? You know, you get a free month bonus if you use my link. I actually paid full price for mine, and I honestly still consider it a totally worthwhile investment for the level of reliable security it provides. Just use nordvpn.com/jacksaint to try it out today. They offer 24-hour support and a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no harm in giving it a shot. Back to the vid. Released a full 7 years after the previous film, this is what I like to call their transition to the old Snake era of Dirty Harry, where he's slowly becoming a cranky grandpa, increasingly unconvincing as the wish fulfillment super cop he continues to be. The film walks an interesting tightrope, where it in many ways tries to accomplish the same objectives as the previous 2 films, answering criticisms of the films made by detractors, But it also kind of feels like they forgot half the shit that happened in the other movies. For as much as Magnum Force tried to stress the importance of a line between Harry's actions and that of a vigilante, with Harry being better by virtue of only doing what's necessary, here he's being as absurdly impulsive and dangerous to civilians and criminals alike as ever.
Are you aware that you have destroyed months of surveillance and intelligence work? I mean, we're talking here thousands of dollars, hundreds of man-hours. Special Investigations has been busting its ass preparing a case against Threlkis.
Maybe we save the taxpayers a little money.
At one point he steals a bus full of old people to chase down a suspect. A bus full of old people. This is like barely one stage removed from the cartoonishly evil thing the bad guy did in the first movie. So in this entry, Harry relearns the lesson that feminism is good actually, aiding a woman hoping to live out a rape, revenge, murder fantasy. Yep, this one gets pretty heavy. So Harry is initially put on a case to solve a rash of killings, which we later find out have been committed as a form of retribution by one woman, Jennifer Spencer, against a group of men who had in the past gang raped her and her sister. On finding out about all this, Harry helps her kill the rest and cover everything up.
I think you'll find his gun there was used in all the killings.
Now, what I want to make clear is whether it's good or bad that Harry helped her in and of itself, that's not the point here. The point is in highlighting that this once again falls completely out of line with what these movies have previously said. Harry's entire justification for acting recklessly and murdering criminals with no due process is because he believes he does so only when necessary and with direct provocation. These killings are not being directly provoked. The victim in this case is directly seeking out these men to murder them all, and at the end is satisfied having slaughtered the lot with the help of Harry. Harry even reminds us of this contradiction near the end of the film, discussing the line between good and bad uses of violence.
Revenge.
The oldest motivation known to mankind.
And you don't approve?
Until it breaks the law.
So what actual point is being made here? There isn't actually a line between what Harry is doing and any other vigilante? Is the difference between a hero and a villain just whoever you happen to agree with? And on its own, that'd be a pretty inoffensive point, right? Yes, the difference between a good guy and a bad guy, at the end of the day, is what you think makes someone good or bad. Unless you believe in a faith where a third party like a god is deciding what makes things right or wrong. If not, yeah. If you think a rape victim should have the right to murder their rapist at any time, this character's actions are good, or at least neutral. And if you think they shouldn't, what she's doing is bad. Harry thinks it's good, which is why he helps her get away with the exact actions he punished the traffic cops for in the second movie. But the key thing to note here is Harry is not just an individual. He may have tossed his badge way back in the first movie, but Harry is still a representative of the law. And if I can make a big claim here, I think all of this perceived contradiction was on purpose. I think that in the way this story plays out, there was a deliberate sleight of hand to obfuscate that the beliefs Harry Callahan represents are becoming even more radical, and they did it by framing a scenario sympathetic enough to discourage it from too much criticism. After the series hasn't once so much as mentioned sexual assault, after 3 movies, now a rape victim emerges in a starring role, out for bloody revenge, appearing to tell our protagonist things like this.
But you know you're an endangered species. This is the age of lapsed responsibilities and defeated justice. Sorry, I'm sure you get that sort of thing all the time.
I don't hear it enough.
I joked at the start about this being an extension of Harry's journey into a feminist icon, but it does feel like that's how cynically this is played out. While Magnum Force came to justify the brutal and remorseless pseudo-fascist of the original,
I'm afraid you've misjudged me.
Now it's being repackaged back to us through this film, but it's being sold to us in the shape of someone the audience is more obviously predisposed to sympathizing with, especially more liberal critics who criticized the message in the past. It's not that the team behind Dirty Harry suddenly thought that sexual assault was a serious thing worth talking about. Jennifer exists very transparently as a reflection of Harry, her arc existing solely as a parallel to his, to help justify his beliefs that he, as an officer of the law, should be able to do anything he pleases, up to and including murder without need of legal justification. All he needs is to believe that he is good, that he is righteous. Hey, did I mention there was a bunch of Christ symbolism in the first movie? No? Well, imagine that I did, and now I'm referencing it again. Whoa! Didn't think I'd bring that back, did ya? Shows that I thought this one through. Now this is the big one. This was the Dirty Harry movie that made me realise I couldn't just talk about Dirty Harry in the context of a broader discussion of cop movies. This needed to be its own video. Because in the fifth and final entry of the Dirty Harry cinematic universe, the filmmakers pose the question of how responsible sensationalist media is for glorifying violent retribution, and blames punk rock and horror movies. Now, I'll be fair, the film does not offer this as the only possible cause of increased violence. They also blame mental illness.
Diagnosis was process schizophrenia.
This was by far the most all-over-the-place movie in this series politically, speculating on a variety of things as possible causes for the perceived crime wave at the time, up to and including the character of Harry Callahan himself.
Can I shake your hand?
It's that one Mitchell and Webb Nazi skit in cinematic form. Here, Old Man Callahan is paired up with a Chinese-American sidekick. Don't get too excited, he's a kung fu expert protected by ancient Chinese magic. In a case of public figures and celebrities inexplicably dropping like flies. So they all start dying, and Harry is forced to bump shoulders with movie producers, who he immediately derides for not insisting a murdered actor took less drugs.
Look, Johnny had agents, lawyers, friends. If he had a drug problem, it was their job to take care of it, not mine.
Well, that's a very caring attitude.
Oh, sorry, Harry. I forgot how much worse private drug use was than, say, ramming a car into a hostage situation or driving a bus full of old people into a murder suspect.
Well, that's a very caring attitude. Well, that's a very caring attitude.
Well, I'm all broken up about that man's rights.
That's a very caring attitude.
It turns out the list of deaths matches with a... So remember a few months back when there was that Momo challenge scare, where a bunch of baby boomer Facebook groups circulated a story about all these kids getting caught up on this phone game, the Momo challenge, where they called a number and then the number would tell them to do more and more depraved and dangerous things, and eventually kids started dying from it? But then this didn't actually happen and it was just a hoax made up to scare old people? So it turns out the DEADPOOL is an underground challenge popular with teens, where they guess which celebrities are going to die in the next year, and the lead investigation is about whether an impressionable teen took the game too far and started killing people. Now, to be clear, this does not end up being the case. It's just one of many suggestions the film has for what leads to criminal behaviour. Journalists hungry for a splashy headline are also blamed, and yes, the film does go as far as to suggest the media glamorization of rogue cops like Callahan may have helped contribute to this issue.
I'd just like to thank you, pal. It's about time somebody did something about garbage like Gennaro.
Lo and behold, Callahan is forced into providing a profile story for a hungry journalist, in return for not suing him when, in a fit of rage, he absolutely annihilates one of their cameras. Callahan incites a prison murder.
He says that smoking can cause cancer, and anyone who smokes as much as you do is one dumb son of a bitch.
And as the case develops, his journalist companion becomes increasingly guilt-ridden over the part she may have played in influencing the killer. This reaches its zenith when her and Callahan encounter a man threatening to set himself on fire because he wants to be a local celebrity. Once again, the film never proclaims this as the root cause, just another suggestion, and another as the horror movie producer involved with the deaths is accused of influencing the killer through his films.
Well, do you feel there's any parallel between the deaths in Hotel Satan and the death of Johnny Square's Molly?
Oh, for God's sake, that's a stupid question.
And in the end, it's schizophrenia. It's a delusional fan who thinks the director stole his movie and wants to get revenge. He was mentally ill. That's why he did it. This is the closest thing to a root cause to the killings the film really suggests. And honestly, it's just perfect in the context of this movie. After giving us a broad list of a dozen different possible societal reasons for what would lead to a spree killing, in comes the almost comforting assurance that no, this is actually just because a guy had a bad brain, and unfortunately, you can't jail someone just for being mentally ill.
I'm sorry. This is one instance where the system failed.
Then Harry harpoons him through a wall. So yeah, there's a lot going on in this film. It takes half steps to blame a bunch of different factors for criminal violence, including the existence of Dirty Harry himself, then half steps away. It's easy to read this as a response to the continued moral outrage against Harry as a character. How can you blame these movies for glorifying violence when there's so many other things out there? Ultimately, the film attempts to do the same thing all sequels of that original Dirty Harry film have done. An attempt to diffuse and ideally normalize the extreme political position on law enforcement that Harry Callahan represents. One thing needs to be made clear above all else about these movies. Dirty Harry does not change. Harry is not Scrooge. There is no grand realization he has that makes him totally reconsider his beliefs. He continues to do all the utterly irresponsible things we saw in the first movie right up to the fifth. The only thing that ever really changes is how he chooses to frame his beliefs to others. Other than that, he is unchangeable, as is often pointed out by other characters.
Callahan is the one constant in an ever-changing universe.
So I guess it's time to answer the big one here. Why does any of this matter? So I'll now present our word of the day, because it's very important for understanding how the vague blur of a franchise that is the Dirty Harry movies can manifest into a coherent and acceptable political ideology to so many people, to such an extent that the president himself was quoting lines from the movies.
And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
And invoking Dirty Harry imagery when discussing crime and law enforcement. Our word is recuperation. Political recuperation, at a most basic level, refers to the ways extreme and radical ideas can be twisted and absorbed into something that fits within a more socially acceptable environment. For the prime modern media example of this, I always like to talk about the Kendall Jenner Pepsi ad. Oh, Pepsi. You saw that people were really into protesting for their rights lately, but you also knew that being too specific on the protests might alienate some of your audience. So in an ingenious ploy, you co-opted all the imagery of protest to capitalize on the movement, without the possible offense of supporting any actual cause. And hey, you want to see another form of political recuperation? Yeah, that's right. We brought it back around. So when Barney Fife stood up against the expectation that he'd let the governor's parking ticket slide, that was its own form of recuperation. Fife was invoking the ideals of standing up for what's right, even if those around you try to tempt you otherwise. And the message communicated was, this is fine. It may have felt dangerous and radical, But there really were no tangible or threatening consequences to this action. Barney is loved, Barney is praised, Barney returns to the status quo. And in his own way, Sheriff Deputy Barney Fife himself represents a form of recuperation. He is repeatedly shown to be utterly incompetent in his duties as an officer. He will wrongfully imprison people. He will wrongfully imprison himself. He will accidentally discharge his firearm as much as once an episode. But through the process of belonging to this quaint, picturesque little sitcom, an officer like Barney can be recuperated, processed into its most socially acceptable form. All it takes is changing out the true, lasting negative consequences of these law enforcement behaviours, and the behaviour becomes permitted. And hell, I guess if you wanted to go even further, try to make it all gritty and serious, really convince the audience that this was a representation of the real world they lived in, but you kept that habit of recuperation, you could probably convince a lot of people that a lot of extremist beliefs can be made acceptable. So a lot of the time it's the more lefty side that people are referring to when they talk about recuperation. The left tends to be really good at making genuinely interesting stylistic and aesthetic decisions that help draw in mass appeal. Unfortunately, the left also tends to propose ideas that directly oppose the interests of large corporations, so the aesthetics get taken and not the ideas. Despite this, recuperation can manifest in many different ways to any ideology seen far outside the norm. And what I'd like to suggest today is that the Dirty Harry series, as the prototypical renegade vigilante series from which so many others were spawned, is a perfect example of recuperated extreme authoritarian beliefs. As I've made a note of with every film in this series we've covered following the first one, the Dirty Harry movies have a unique preoccupation with responding directly to criticisms made of the previous films. Once again, Harry gets accused of being a fascist, so he explicitly distinguishes himself from fascists. Harry is accused of being bigoted, so he says a vaguely nice thing about gay people and gets a female partner and even a nice Chineseman. And when the more extreme aspects of Harry's beliefs rear their ugly head again, such as losing that justification that Harry will only act when left with no options and provoked, it's slipped to the audience in the most socially acceptable form imaginable, helping a victim of brutal sexual assault seek justice. And by the fifth movie, an admittance that, sure, maybe these movies could arguably have contributed to a media glamorization of righteous, brutal vengeance. But hey, it could be lots of stuff. It would obviously be a huge stretch to say that Dirty Harry directly caused a lot of real-world deaths. It'd be the kind of thing you'd need a very direct link to even begin to claim. What isn't a stretch is to suggest Dirty Harry's rhetoric was extremely appealing to a lot of people, both liberals and conservatives, even though what it basically represented was the belief that we should grant authority absolute and unquestioned power. It was a message that resonated with more than just cops. I do not for a second think that, of all places, the USA would be home to a population that think it would be good for a totalitarian state to dictate a supreme order over the common man. I'm sure they exist, but they are not a majority. So why did Dirty Harry resonate with so many when that's basically what he represents? Dirty Harry does not respect the court of law, or the investigative process, or human rights in general. He respects having the freedom to inflict justice on those he has decided are bad and wrong. It's easy to forget that before this film, Clint Eastwood had made his name in Wild West movies where he played the ruthless sheriff or the vigilante outlaw. But I do think it speaks to the calculated effort Dirty Harry represents to recuperate radical authoritarian ideas into acceptable discourse. When you're introduced to Harry, and you don't just see Harry, but every no-nonsense lawbringer from a time when it was just you, an open desert, and 1,000 miles of rogue bandits, that once again makes it feel more normal when you see a police officer threaten and torture and murder criminal suspects, constantly endangering civilian lives in the process. And anytime criticism occurs, anytime callouts are made, that feeds the recuperation. It gives Eastwood and company another avenue to clear up the problematic holes in Harry Callahan, to invent the most acceptable version of the brutal and righteous killer cop. And so, in the end, we get our Thermian arguments, our extreme ideological propaganda justified by parody levels of in-universe convenience, the whitewashing of unjustified police violence and brutality, into a form where it appears to be the most rational option.
Everybody wants results, but nobody wants to do what they have to do to get them done.
And that's how we get Dirty Harry, everyone's favourite corrupt, sadistic, authoritarian dictator. And it doesn't matter that by almost any metric, we know now that Harry Callahan was wrong. The tough-on-crime policies of the 70s and 80s, the emphasis of punitive over rehabilitative justice, the heavily misguided war on drugs, all of this ultimately served to provide the US with little but a skyrocketing prison population and cycles of alienation and recidivism. And of course, questions of things like gun control and systemic racism, these things are hardly even suggested, because the Dirty Harry series had established the narrative, and in it shaped a world where Harry's law could be justified. And that's just one part of why all cops are bad in media. So as I've mentioned, when I started writing this, it was originally going to be a more expansive look on the evolution of cop movies. In fact, I haven't really begun to answer the question this video is named after, why all cops are bad in media. But on watching this, I hope you understand why I chose to start from this seed, and hopefully as we keep going here, you'll see where a lot of these ideas filter elsewhere. Next up, I want to delve further into the tricky subject of recuperation, and specifically how even the most explicit critiques of extremist ideology can be commodified back into the system. And I think I know a couple more movie cops who could definitely help us out in that regard.
Nice shooting, son. What's your name?
Murphy.
Hey, thanks for watching. Just want to cap things off with one final reminder to check out NordVPN for a reliable and affordable option if you want to help protect your online security. One final time, that's a 75% discount and a free month of the service over at nordvpn.com/jacksaint. I genuinely find them to be one of the best VPN services out there. Plus they have 24/7 support and a 30-day money-back guarantee, so give it a shot and see how you feel. Other than that, I want to thank all of my patrons scrolling by now. If you'd like to join them on the credits here, please consider supporting the show over on Patreon, or sending a one-time donation over on Ko-fi. Otherwise, please consider sharing this video on your social media platform of choice to help me grow the channel. Today I'd also like to give a special thanks to patrons A. Recusant, Kaylin Stain, Kaura Ra, Evie Rosk, Industrial Robot, Malpatuis, and Torin the Exile, with an extra special thanks to Leftist Tech Support. If you'd like to get in touch with me, please feel free to follow over on Twitter, or check out my streams over at twitch.tv/lacksaint. Expect the next entry in this series sooner rather than later. Other than that, thanks again for watching, love you all, and stay safe.
Quiet.